Michael, are you sure you don't need help with that? Eleanor Wilson asked, watching her son struggle with an oversized bouquet of peonies as they navigated her kitchen. I've got it. Mom, Michael insisted, finally managing to arrange the flowers in a crystal vase. At 35, he still had the boyish charm that made him popular in high school, though the recent divorce had added lines around his eyes that hadn't been there 6 months ago. Eleanor studied him with the practiced eye of a mother who had raised a child alone for most of his life. Robert's heart attack 15 years ago had left her a widow at 49, forcing her to become both parents to their only son. Now, at 64, she'd created a comfortable life in their Austin home, the sprawling 2-acre property that Robert's financial acumen had secured before his death. She's going to love you, Michael said, adjusting the flowers one final time. I mean it. Sophie is different from anyone I've ever dated. Eleanor smiled, though her stomach tightened at the eagerness in his voice. She'd heard this before, most recently about Melissa, the marketing executive whose irreconcilable differences with Michael had led to their divorce after only 18 months. I'm looking forward to meeting her, Eleanor said, returning to the simmering pot of bouillabaisse. She'd chosen the French seafood stew deliberately, after learning that Michael's new girlfriend was from Paris. Does she like seafood, I should have asked earlier? She loves it. She was actually impressed that you were making bouillabaisse. Said most Americans butcher it. Michael checked his watch. She should be here any minute. She's always punctual. It's the French way, apparently. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Eleanor wiped her hands on her apron, took a deep breath, and followed Michael to the door. Standing on her porch was one of the most elegant women Eleanor had ever seen. Sophie Miller was petite, with a cascade of chestnut hair falling in soft waves around a heart-shaped face. She wore a simple black dress that somehow looked more sophisticated than anything in Eleanor's closet, paired with understated pearl earrings. But it was her eyes that caught Eleanor's attention, intelligent, observant, and calculating. Mrs. Wilson, Sophie said, stepping forward to take Eleanor's hands in both of hers. Her accent was perfect, just enough French to be charming without impeding understanding. Michael has told me so much about you. I'm so excited to finally meet the woman who raised such a wonderful man. Please, call me Eleanor, she replied, immediately warming to the younger woman's genuine-seeming interest. Come in, dinner's almost ready. As they moved into the house, Sophie glanced around with obvious appreciation. What a beautiful home. So much history in these walls. I imagine my late husband and I bought it 30 years ago, Eleanor explained, leading them into the living room. We were the second owners. The original family built it in 1952. Ah, mid-century. The architecture is lovely. Sophie moved to the mantelpiece, studying the family photographs. Is this Michael as a child, those curls? Michael groaned good-naturedly. Mom insisted on letting my hair grow until I was 5. I looked like a cherub in a Renaissance painting. You were adorable, Sophie assured him, then turned to another photograph. And this must be your husband. Eleanor Michael has your eyes, but his father's jawline. Eleanor felt a pang of appreciation. After Michael's string of girlfriends who couldn't be bothered to remember basic details about her life, Sophie's genuine interest felt refreshing. Yes, that's Robert. He passed away 15 years ago, heart attack. Very sudden. I'm so sorry, Sophie said, her voice softening. It must have been difficult raising Michael alone after that. We managed, Eleanor said, surprised at how easily Sophie had maneuvered her into discussing personal matters. Robert left us well provided for, and I had a background in diplomatic services that served me well in a second career. Diplomatic services. Sophie's eyebrows rose. How fascinating were you stationed abroad? Various postings, Eleanor said, suddenly reticent to share too much. Including Paris. Actually, I spent 4 years there in my 20s. Something flickered across Sophie's face so brief Eleanor might have imagined it before her expression returned to one of polite interest. Alors vous parlez français, she asked. It's been years, Eleanor admitted. I'd be terribly rusty now. Mom's being modest, Michael interjected. She used to be fluent in 3 languages. Dad always said she could have been an ambassador if she'd wanted. Sophie smiled. Languages are like bicycles once learned. never truly forgotten. The evening progressed smoothly. Sophie complimented the bouillabaisse perfect balance of saffron most Americans use too much, asked thoughtful questions about Eleanor's life, and charmed them both with stories about growing up in Paris. She spoke of her father, a literature professor at the Sorbonne, and her mother who worked for the local government in Marseille after they relocated from Paris. My parents wanted a quieter life outside the capital, she explained over dessert. Paris is magnificent but exhausting. Marseille has the sea, the sun, and a more relaxed pace. Eleanor found herself completely won over. Sophie was everything Michael had described: cultured, intelligent, and genuinely interested in their family. When she helped clear the table without being asked, Eleanor exchanged a pleased glance with her son. Perhaps this relationship would be different. Sophie speaks 5 languages fluently, Michael boasted, squeezing her hand across the table. She's been teaching me French, though I'm hopeless at it. Oh, you're being modest, Sophie laughed, her eyes twinkling. His pronunciation is, how do you say, endearing. They all laughed, and for the first time since his divorce, Eleanor felt hopeful about Michael's romantic future. Here was someone with substance, intelligence, and apparent warmth. The mood shifted when Michael's phone rang halfway through coffee. I'm sorry, he said, checking the screen. It's work. I have to take this. We're in the middle of a major project launch. Of course, Sophie said graciously. Take your time. As Michael stepped into the study for privacy, Eleanor began loading the dishwasher. She was arranging coffee cups when Sophie's phone rang. Excuse me, Sophie said, moving toward the living room. It's probably my mother checking in. Eleanor continued working in the kitchen, the sound of running water masking the first part of Sophie's conversation. It wasn't until she turned off the faucet that Sophie's voice carried clearly through the open doorway. Oui, maman, elle semble inoffensive, Sophie was saying. Viel clairement désespérée de garder son fils heureux. Elle sera facile à gérer une fois que nous serons mariés. Eleanor froze, a dinner plate suspended halfway to the dishwasher. Her French might be rusty, but the words were unmistakable. Yes, Mom, she seems harmless, old, clearly desperate to keep her son happy. She'll be easy to manage once we're married. Setting the plate down silently, Eleanor moved closer to the doorway, careful to stay out of sight. La maison est belle, plus grande que Nicole l'a décrite, Sophie continued. Eh oui, il y a certainement des actifs familiaux à considérer. Elle a mentionné que son père les avait laissés très à l'aise. The house is lovely, bigger than Michael described, and yes, there are definitely family assets to consider. She mentioned his father left them very comfortable. Eleanor's hands began to shake. She forced herself to keep moving, to maintain the quiet sounds of cleaning while she listened. Ne t'inquiète pas, Sophie continued, her voice dropping lower. J'ai déjà commencé à travailler sur l'angle de l'héritage. Les Américains sont si sentimentaux à propos de l'héritage familial. Don't worry, I've already started working on the inheritance angle. Americans are so sentimental about family legacy. Eleanor's throat tightened as she reached for her phone in her pocket. With trembling fingers, she activated the voice recorder app, placing it on the counter closer to the doorway. Michael est parfait pour ça, Sophie said, her musical laugh now sounding cold to Eleanor's ears. Naïf, généreux, et complètement infatué. Michael is perfect for this. Naïve, generous, and completely infatuated. La carte verte sera simple une fois que nous serons mariés, et le divorce encore plus simple une fois que j'aurai ce dont j'ai besoin. 2 ans maximum. Puis je serai libre de retourner à Paris avec la citoyenneté américaine et assez d'argent pour vivre exactement comme je l'entends. The green card will be simple once we're married, and the divorce even simpler once I have what I need. 2 years maximum. Then I'll be free to return to Paris with American citizenship and enough money to live exactly as I choose. The plate Eleanor had been holding slipped from her numb fingers and shattered against the kitchen floor. The crash echoed through the house. Mrs. Wilson, are you all right? Sophie appeared in the doorway instantly, her face a mask of concern. The transformation was astonishing, from cold calculator to worried guest in a heartbeat. Just clumsy, Eleanor managed, kneeling to collect the pieces. These old hands aren't what they used to be. Sophie hurried to help, her movements graceful and considerate. Please, let me do this. You shouldn't be cleaning up after hosting such a wonderful dinner. The irony was suffocating. This woman had just finished explaining to her supposed mother how she planned to manipulate and eventually rob Eleanor's son, and now she was helping clean up broken dishes with the tenderness of an actual caring daughter-in-law. I have much experience with cleaning, Sophie said with a self-deprecating laugh. I worked in hotels in Paris before meeting Michael. Very humbling work, but it taught me to appreciate when others make effort for me. Another lie, delivered with such sincerity that Eleanor almost questioned what she'd heard moments before. Almost. Michael returned from his call, apologizing profusely. Sorry about that. Crisis at the site, but it's handled now. He surveyed the scene of them cleaning together and his face lit up. Look at you two already acting like family. Sophie stood gracefully, disposing of the broken porcelain. Your mother is wonderful. Michael, so warm and welcoming. I feel very lucky. Eleanor found her voice somehow. Well, aren't you sweet? Michael's right. You do seem like family already. They settled in the living room with coffee, and Sophie regaled them with what Eleanor now knew were carefully crafted stories about her life in France, the struggling artist narrative, the difficult childhood that made her appreciate Michael's stability, the dreams of building a life in America with the right partner, every word calculated, designed to hit Michael's protective instincts and his American savior complex. And it was working beautifully. Her son hung on every syllable, his eyes soft with the kind of love that makes smart men do incredibly stupid things. Tell Mom about the visa situation, Michael prompted gently. She might have some insights. She's always been good at navigating bureaucracy. Sophie's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly, but her smile never wavered. Oh, it's complicated, but not urgent. The tourist visa is good for several more months, and Michael has been helping me understand the process for more permanent arrangements. The pause was perfectly timed, allowing Michael to fill in the romantic implications without her having to lie outright. Masterful. We're thinking about engagement soon, Michael said, reaching for her hand. Once Sophie settled and comfortable with the idea of staying permanently. Oh, Eleanor said, proud of how steady her voice sounded. When you know, I suppose. Sophie ducked her head modestly. I never expected to find someone like Michael. Sometimes the heart surprises us. Indeed, Eleanor thought, the heart had definitely been surprised tonight, just not in the way Sophie meant. As the evening wound down and Michael walked Sophie to her car, Eleanor stood at the window watching them embrace. Sophie was saying something that made Michael laugh, probably spinning another beautiful lie about their future together. He looked so happy, so hopeful, so completely unaware that the woman in his arms saw him as nothing more than a stepping stone to American citizenship and whatever money she could extract from their family. The question was, what was she going to do about it? Eleanor didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat in Robert's old study, surrounded by decades of financial documents and family records, trying to understand exactly what Sophie thought she was targeting. Robert had been a careful man, methodical in his approach to financial security. Their assets weren't flashy, but they were substantial. The house alone was worth close to $1 million, sitting on 2 acres in one of Austin's most desirable neighborhoods. The investment portfolios, retirement accounts, and life insurance policies painted a picture of comfortable upper-middle-class wealth. Nothing extravagant, but certainly enough to tempt someone with Sophie's apparent agenda. What chilled Eleanor most was how efficiently Sophie had assessed their situation. One dinner and she'd already calculated inheritance angles and timeline strategies. This wasn't impulsive opportunism. This was professional predation. By dawn, Eleanor had made 2 decisions. First, she would not tell Michael what she'd overheard. Not yet. He was so deeply infatuated that any accusation would only drive him closer to Sophie and cast Eleanor as the jealous mother who couldn't accept her son's happiness. Second, she needed to know exactly who Sophie Miller really was. She started with the basics: Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Sophie's social media presence was polished but thin, mostly photos from the last 18 months. No deep history, no childhood friends or family members tagged in old posts. The few pictures from France were generic tourist shots that could have been taken by anyone. Her LinkedIn claimed she worked in hospitality management in Paris, but the company names were vague, and there were no colleague connections or recommendations. For someone supposedly in her late 20s with a career in hospitality, her professional network was remarkably sparse. Eleanor was halfway through a virtual rabbit hole when her phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen, and her heart clenched with guilt. How do you talk to your child when you know something that will devastate them but can't prove it yet? Morning, Mom. Thanks again for last night. Sophie couldn't stop talking about how wonderful you were. I bet she couldn't, Eleanor thought. Aloud, she said. She's lovely, sweetheart. I can see why you're so taken with her. I'm thinking about proposing soon, he said, his voice bright with excitement. Maybe Christmas. I know it's fast, but when it's right, it's right. Christmas. 2 months away. Eleanor's stomach tightened. That's wonderful news. Michael, have you thought about what kind of proposal where you might do it? As he chatted about his romantic plans, Eleanor was calculating timelines in her head. If they married quickly after the holidays, Sophie would have her green card application filed by spring. 2 years later, she'd be eligible for permanent residency without conditions. Then the divorce, carefully timed to maximize her take from community property laws in Texas. She was planning to systematically destroy Eleanor's son's life over 4 years. Mom, you still there? Sorry, darling. Just thinking about how happy this makes me. The lie came easier than expected. Have you met her family yet? Her parents? Not in person, but we video chat with them sometimes. They live in Marseille. Her father's a retired professor. Her mother works in local government. Very traditional family, which is why she's being careful about the engagement timeline. They want to meet me properly first. Traditional family. If they truly existed, they were probably horrified by their daughter's immigration fraud scheme. Or maybe they were in on it. That sounds reasonable, Eleanor said carefully. Maybe you should visit them before proposing. Really understand where she comes from. Actually, they're planning to visit us next month. Sophie wanted them to meet you before we make anything official. She values family approval. Of course, she did. Meet the Marks family, charm the parents, establish herself as the perfect future daughter-in-law, then spring the engagement and rush toward marriage before anyone had time to ask difficult questions. After Michael hung up, Eleanor sat staring at her computer screen, feeling the weight of impossible choices. She could hire a private investigator, but that felt like crossing a line that would damage her relationship with Michael. Regardless of what they found, she could confront Sophie directly, but she was clearly skilled at manipulation. Or she could be patient, play the long game, let Sophie think she was winning while Eleanor gathered the information she needed. That's when she remembered her niece Jessica, her sister's youngest daughter, who worked for the State Department in visa services. Family connections could be remarkably useful. Aunt Eleanor, you're putting me in a very difficult position, Jessica said, her voice careful over the phone. They were meeting for lunch at Eleanor's favorite cafe, though today she wasn't paying much attention to her salad. I'm not asking you to do anything inappropriate, Eleanor said, stirring her iced tea slowly. I just want to understand the general process. Educational purposes. Jessica laughed despite herself. Educational purposes, right? And this has nothing to do with Michael's mysterious French girlfriend who appeared out of nowhere 6 months ago. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, studying her niece's face. Jessica had inherited the family's sharp instincts and no-nonsense attitude. If anyone could help navigate this situation, it was her. Tell me what you know, Jessica said quietly. Everything? So Eleanor did. The overheard phone conversation, the thin social media presence, the convenient backstory that hit all of Michael's emotional triggers. Jessica listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious with each detail. There are red flags, she admitted when Eleanor finished. The timeline is aggressive. The background seems superficial. And frankly, the whole narrative sounds like something from the manual on marriage fraud indicators. There's a manual. Oh, honey, there are several. Jessica pulled out her phone and showed Eleanor a government website. Look at this checklist. How many boxes does she tick? As they went through the indicators together, Eleanor's heart sank. Sophie wasn't just suspicious. She was practically a case study in marriage fraud rushed timeline, financial motivation, limited verifiable background, age gap that favored the immigrant, and emotional manipulation of the American partner. The thing is, Jessica continued, knowing something and proving it are very different challenges. These people are professionals. They've studied American men. They know exactly which buttons to push, and they're very good at covering their tracks. So what would you do? Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Officially, I'd advise Michael to slow down, do proper due diligence, and insist on meeting her family in France before making any commitments. And unofficially I'd gather evidence, document everything, and I'd be prepared for the possibility that by the time you have proof, it might be too late to prevent the marriage, but not too late to minimize the damage. The damage, her son's broken heart, his financial losses, his faith in love itself. The ripple effects could last years, maybe decades. There's something else you should know, Jessica said carefully. If she's doing this professionally, Michael probably isn't her first target. These operations often work the same territories, use similar methods. There might be other victims, other sons, other families destroyed by Sophie's calculated charm. The thought filled Eleanor with a cold fury she'd never experienced before. How would I find them? Very carefully, Jessica warned, and completely legally. But if there are patterns of behavior, they leave traces, immigration applications, marriage records, divorce proceedings. It's all public information if you know where to look. By the time they finished lunch, Eleanor had a plan. It wasn't a nice plan, and it wasn't a simple plan, but it was thorough. If Sophie Miller was a professional con artist, she was about to discover that Eleanor Wilson wasn't nearly as harmless as she appeared. That afternoon, Eleanor made 3 phone calls. The first was to Mark Reynolds, a private investigator Jessica had recommended, someone who specialized in background verification with impeccable discretion and extensive experience in immigration fraud cases. His 25 years with the FBI before going private gave him connections Eleanor would need. The second call was to her attorney, updating her will and establishing some additional financial protections that had nothing to do with Sophie and everything to do with being prepared for any outcome. The third call was the most important one. Michael, sweetheart, I've been thinking about what you said about Sophie's parents visiting next month. Yeah, what about it? Well, I'd love to host them for dinner, a proper welcome to the family. And you know what, I think I should brush up on my French before they arrive. Maybe take a refresher course. I'd hate for them to think I wasn't making an effort. Mark Reynolds looked nothing like what Eleanor had expected. No trench coat or fedora, just a mild-mannered man in his 50s who could have been anyone's accountant, which, as it turned out, was exactly the point. The best investigations happen when nobody realizes they're being investigated, he explained, settling into the chair across from Eleanor's kitchen table with a manila folder and a cup of coffee. Especially in cases like this, where the subject is already hyper-aware of potential scrutiny. It had been 2 weeks since Eleanor had hired him, and the preliminary results were enlightening in the worst possible way. Let's start with what we know for certain, Mark said, opening his folder. Sophie Miller entered the United States on a tourist visa 8 months ago. The address she listed on her arrival documents is a short-term rental apartment that she vacated after 6 weeks, right around the time she would have met Michael. So, she came here specifically to find a husband. It's looking that way. The pattern suggests systematic targeting rather than organic relationship development. He pulled out a series of photographs. These are from her social media activity. In the month before she left France, she was researching American dating apps, joining international relationship forums, and participating in online discussions about American immigration law. The photos showed Sophie at her laptop in coffee shops in Paris, always alone, always working on something. Even in candid shots, there was something calculating in her expression. Here's where it gets interesting, Mark continued. The company she claims to have worked for in Paris. It existed, but it went out of business 3 years ago. The references she provided Michael are fake. The phone numbers redirect to a voice service that plays pre-recorded messages. Eleanor's coffee grew cold as Mark laid out the evidence of Sophie's deception. Fabricated employment history, no verifiable address in France for the past 2 years, and most damning of all, a pattern of social media connections that suggested she'd been in contact with other American men before settling on Michael. "There's more," he said quietly. "I found evidence of at least 2 previous attempts at marriage-based immigration fraud. Different names, different stories, but the same face and the same methods." He slid 2 more photographs across the table. The first showed Sophie, with a man in his 40s outside a courthouse in Nevada. The second was from a wedding announcement in a small-town newspaper in Colorado, featuring Marie Fontaine and her American husband. Both marriages lasted less than 2 years. Both ended in divorce, with significant financial settlements. Both men are now dealing with debt and emotional trauma, while she disappeared with American citizenship and their assets. Eleanor stared at the photographs, feeling sick. Michael doesn't know. Michael knows what she's told him, which is a carefully constructed fiction. But Eleanor, there's something else you need to understand. This isn't just fraud. It's a criminal enterprise. We're dealing with someone who has destroyed multiple families and shows no signs of stopping. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in around them. "What do I do with this information?" Mark leaned forward, his expression serious. "That depends on what kind of outcome you want. Do you want to save Michael from making a terrible mistake? Or do you want to ensure Sophie faces consequences for what she's already done?" "Both," Eleanor said without hesitation. "I want both. Then we need to be very strategic. Moving too fast could spook her into disappearing before Michael realizes what's happening. Moving too slow means watching the fraud proceed on schedule." Mark pulled out a timeline chart. "She's planning to introduce her parents next week, probably actors hired to play the role. The engagement will happen shortly after that, with a Christmas proposal that gives them just enough time for a New Year's wedding. New Year's, tax advantages, immigration timing, and emotional manipulation, all wrapped up in romantic symbolism. It's textbook." Mark closed his folder and looked at Eleanor directly. "The question is, are you prepared to play a longer game than she is?" That evening, Eleanor sat in her garden watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere across town, Michael was probably having dinner with his fraudulent fiancée, discussing wedding plans and dreaming about their future together. And next week, Eleanor would sit across from fake parents, speaking her rusty French, and pretending to believe in a love story that was nothing more than an elaborate con. But Sophie Miller had made one crucial mistake in targeting their family. She'd assumed that a 64-year-old widow would be easy to fool, too polite to question, too grateful for her son's happiness to look too closely at its source. She was about to learn that assumption could be very dangerous indeed. As promised, Eleanor had enrolled in an intensive French language refresher course. 3 hours each morning for the past 2 weeks had transformed her rusty linguistic skills into a reasonably polished tool. She wouldn't be delivering poetry, but she could certainly follow a dinner conversation and respond appropriately, a fact she intended to keep to herself until the right moment. Her phone pinged with a text from Mark Reynolds. "Additional information uncovered. Need to meet ASAP. Your house. 10 a.m. tomorrow." Eleanor replied with a simple yes, and tried to ignore the churning in her stomach. Whatever Mark had found, it was significant enough to warrant an unscheduled meeting. That couldn't be good news. The next morning, Mark arrived carrying a thicker folder than before and a grim expression that confirmed Eleanor's fears. "We've identified her," he said without preamble, laying the folder on the kitchen table. "Her real name is Amanda Harris, born in Cleveland, not Paris, 34 years old, not 28. No connection whatsoever to France until 6 years ago when she joined an organization that specializes in marriage fraud schemes." Eleanor processed this information slowly. She's American, not even French. American with a talent for languages and acting. She studied theater at NYU before dropping out in her junior year. Worked various jobs until she connected with a group operating out of Miami that targets wealthy or financially stable single men for marriage fraud. "How many victims?" Mark's expression darkened. "We've confirmed 7 over the past 5 years. That's just the ones we can document. The pattern is always the same. She adopts a new identity, usually European, creates a superficial background, Targets men in their 30s or 40s with financial stability. Rushes to marriage. Secures immigration benefits or financial assets. Then disappears. And no one's caught her yet. Immigration fraud is notoriously difficult to prosecute unless you catch them in the act or have overwhelming evidence. Most victims are too embarrassed to report it, and by the time authorities get involved, the perpetrators have disappeared. Mark pulled out a financial analysis that made Eleanor's stomach turn. Conservative estimate, she's stolen over $2 million from American men in the past 5 years. $2 million, 7 families, and Michael was supposed to be number 8. There's another complication, Mark said, pulling out a driver's license photo of a young woman who looked remarkably like Sophie, but wasn't her. We believe the identity she's using is based on a real person. There is an actual Sophie Miller from Marseille, France, 28 years old, works in hotel management. Amanda likely stole her identity or built a fictional version based on her social media presence. Eleanor stared at the photo of the real Sophie Miller, the innocent woman whose life was being appropriated for a criminal enterprise. Does she know the real Sophie? We don't know yet. We've reached out to contacts in France to look into it, but it's complicated by international jurisdictions. Mark hesitated. There's one more thing you should know. Amanda isn't working alone. The parents she's bringing next week, they're part of the same organization. Professional actors who play whatever role is needed for the con. Eleanor felt a cold fury building inside her. These people weren't just targeting Michael. They were orchestrating an elaborate production designed to manipulate and defraud him. What do we do now? That depends on you, Mark said. We have several options. We could take what we know to Michael directly, but as we discussed, that risks pushing him away and could give Amanda time to disappear. We could contact authorities now, but without catching her in an overt act of fraud, prosecution would be difficult. Or we set a trap. We allow the parents to visit. We play along just enough to make Amanda believe her plan is working. Meanwhile, we coordinate with immigration and customs enforcement to build a case that will stick. Eleanor considered the options. Telling Michael directly would devastate him, and there was no guarantee he would believe her over Amanda's practiced manipulations. Going to authorities prematurely might scare Amanda off without consequences. The trap was risky but offered the best chance of both protecting Michael and ensuring Amanda faced justice. How would this trap work exactly? Mark outlined the plan. They would allow the visit to proceed normally. Eleanor would use her refreshed French skills to identify inconsistencies in the parents' backstory, but wouldn't reveal her understanding. Meanwhile, Mark would coordinate with ICE agent Diana Rodriguez, who specialized in immigration fraud cases. They would build evidence during the visit, then arrange for Agent Rodriguez to coincidentally appear during a crucial moment like Christmas Eve, when Michael planned to propose. The timing is crucial, Mark warned. Too early and she might run. Too late and Michael gets engaged to someone who's about to be arrested. We need to thread the needle perfectly. That afternoon, Eleanor went through the motions of preparing for the upcoming visit like an actor rehearsing for the performance of her life. She stocked the guest room with fresh linens, planned menus that would showcase her knowledge of French cuisine, and practiced looking delighted at the prospect of meeting her future in-laws. Michael called that evening, his voice bright with excitement. "Mom, they're arriving Tuesday at noon. I've taken the day off to pick them up from the airport. They're staying at my place, but I was hoping we could all have dinner at your house that first night. Sophie says her parents are really looking forward to meeting you." "I'd be delighted," Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "I've been practicing my French. It's coming back more quickly than I expected." "That's great, but don't worry too much, they both speak excellent English. Sophie says her father taught English literature for years before retiring." Another carefully crafted detail in Amanda's fictional narrative. Eleanor wondered if the man playing Professor Miller had bothered to study English literature, or if he was counting on no one asking specific questions. "How long will they be staying?" she asked, mentally calculating how much time they had to gather evidence. "Just 5 days. They're heading back Sunday. Sophie wants to show them Austin. Maybe take a day trip to San Antonio. Oh, and Mom," his voice dropped to an excited whisper, "I picked up Grandma's ring from the safe deposit box yesterday. I'm going to propose on Christmas Eve, just like we talked about." Eleanor's heart sank at the thought of her mother's ring, a 3-carat diamond that had been in the family for 4 generations, being used in a fraudulent engagement. But she kept her voice cheerful. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. She'll love it." After hanging up, Eleanor called Mark with the updated timeline. The parents would arrive Tuesday. They had 5 days to gather evidence and coordinate with ICE. The clock was ticking. "I'll contact Agent Rodriguez immediately," Mark assured her. "We'll have everything in place by the time they arrive." As she hung up, Eleanor stared at the family photographs on her mantelpiece, decades of memories. Moments of genuine love and connection that Amanda Harris was attempting to exploit for profit. The anger that had been simmering inside her crystallized into something harder and more focused. Amanda Harris had made a fatal mistake in targeting the Wilson family. She'd assumed a 64-year-old widow would be an easy mark. She was about to discover just how wrong she was. Tuesday morning arrived with a chill in the air, unusual for Austin in November. Eleanor stood in her kitchen, arranging fresh flowers for the dining table and trying to calm her racing thoughts. In 12 hours, she would be hosting a dinner for professional criminals who had targeted her son. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on her. Her phone rang Mark Reynolds, calling with final instructions. "Everything's in place," he said without preamble. "Agent Rodriguez is ready. She'll be monitoring the situation but won't make contact until we give the signal. And that would be Christmas Eve. As we discussed, we need to establish a pattern of behavior first. Tonight is about gathering intelligence, identifying inconsistencies, collecting evidence of their coordination. Your job is to observe and remember, nothing more." Eleanor took a deep breath. "What about recording devices I could easily, absolutely not?" Mark cut her off. "Unauthorized recordings could jeopardize the entire case. Agent Rodriguez will handle the surveillance aspect through official channels. Just be yourself, a slightly rusty French speaker excited to meet her son's future in-laws." After hanging up, Eleanor continued her preparations with the methodical focus that had served her well during her diplomatic career. The menu was deliberately chosen a traditional coq au vin that any French family would recognize, accompanied by regional specialties supposedly from Marseille. If Professor and Mrs. Miller were truly from southern France, they'd appreciate the gesture. If they weren't, well, the inconsistencies in their reaction would be telling. At precisely 4 o'clock, Eleanor's doorbell rang. Through the window, she could see Michael's car in the driveway and 3 figures making their way to her front door. She smoothed her dress, took a steadying breath, and opened the door. "Mom," Michael beamed, stepping forward to embrace her. "I'd like you to meet Sophie's parents, Robert and Patricia Miller." Eleanor studied the couple standing on her porch. Robert Miller was tall and distinguished-looking, with silver-streaked dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him a scholarly appearance. Patricia was petite like her supposed daughter, with the same chestnut hair, though hers was cut in a stylish bob that framed an elegant face lined with what appeared to be decades of Provençal sunshine. They were good. Professionally good. "Madame Wilson," Robert stepped forward with old-world courtesy, taking Eleanor's hand and kissing it lightly. "We are so honored to meet the mother of the man who has captured our daughter's heart." His French accent was perfect, his mannerisms exactly what you'd expect from a retired professor from Marseille. Patricia embraced Eleanor warmly, smelling of expensive perfume and speaking in rapid, enthusiastic French about how wonderful it was to finally meet her. "Please, come in," Eleanor responded in her deliberately rusty French. "I apologize for my poor pronunciation. It's been many years since I spoke your beautiful language." The effect was immediate and telling. Sophie's eyes flickered with something that might have been concern, while her fake parents exchanged the briefest of glances. They hadn't expected Eleanor to speak French at all. More interesting still was the subtle shift in their accents when Patricia responded. Eleanor had spent 4 years in Paris, but had also traveled extensively throughout France during her diplomatic posting. The difference between Parisian French and the more melodic southern accent of Marseille was distinct to her trained ear. The Millers spoke with unmistakably Parisian inflections, despite their supposed decades in Marseille. First inconsistency noted. "Your home is absolutely lovely," Patricia commented as they moved into the living room. "Sophie told us it was beautiful, but pictures don't do it justice." Thank you, Eleanor replied, offering them seats. It's been in our family for 30 years. My late husband was passionate about preserving its original character. A man of taste, Robert nodded appreciatively. I've always believed that architecture reveals the soul of a culture. The mid-century American aesthetic speaks to a particular optimism, doesn't it? A broad, safe observation that could have come from anyone who'd read a basic architectural history. Eleanor made a mental note. Sophie mentioned you taught English literature. Mr. Miller, she asked, deliberately using the American form of address rather than the French professeur. Robert didn't miss a beat. Please, call me Robert. Yes, British Romanticism was my specialty. Keats, Shelley, Byron, the revolutionary spirits. Any particular works you found most compelling to teach? Eleanor pressed gently. A slight pause. Keats's Ode to a Nightingale always resonated with my students. The tension between mortality and transcendence speaks to the young mind. A safe, generic answer. Eleanor doubted he could recite a single line from the poem if challenged. Michael returned from the kitchen with a tray of drinks. Mom's been brushing up on her French for your visit, he said proudly. She used to be fluent. Actually, lived in Paris for a few years. Is that so? Patricia smiled warmly. Which arrondissement? The 6th, Eleanor replied truthfully. Near the Luxembourg Gardens. Ah, the Latin Quarter we visit whenever we're in Paris. Such vibrant energy, Patricia exclaimed. Though nothing compares to the Mediterranean sunshine of Marseille. The conversation flowed smoothly through drinks and into dinner. The Millers told stories about Sophie's childhood, her artistic talents, her determination to experience life beyond the borders of France. Every anecdote was calculated to portray Sophie as the perfect partner for Michael, independent yet family-oriented, ambitious yet grounded, cosmopolitan yet appreciative of simple pleasures. Eleanor noticed that whenever Michael left the room, the conversation between the three visitors would briefly shift to French quick, hushed exchanges that stopped the moment he returned. Most telling was their reaction to her bouillabaisse, a Marseille specialty she'd prepared as a test. This is delightful, Robert commented, though quite different from what we're accustomed to in Marseille. Oh, I followed a traditional recipe, Eleanor replied innocently. Patricia jumped in smoothly. Regional variations, of course. Every family in Marseille has their own recipe, passed down through generations. Yours is more refined, Parisian, perhaps a clever deflection, but another inconsistency noted after dessert. Robert raised his glass in a toast. To new beginnings and family connections. Michael, you have made our Sophie happier than we've ever seen her. And Eleanor, we are delighted to welcome you into our extended family. To family, Eleanor echoed, raising her own glass while studying the three faces around her table. A son filled with genuine love, a woman playing the role of devoted girlfriend, two accomplices pretending to be doting parents. The performance was flawless, but Eleanor was no longer part of the audience. She was watching from backstage, seeing the machinery behind the illusion. When Michael excused himself to take a phone call, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Sophie leaned toward her parents and spoke rapidly in French. Elle parle français mieux que prévu. Soyez prudent. She speaks French better than expected. Be careful. Tout va bien, Robert replied smoothly. Elle ne soupçonne rien. Everything's fine. She suspects nothing. Nous devrions accélérer le calendrier, Patricia asked. Should we accelerate the timeline? Sophie glanced toward the hallway where Michael had disappeared. Non, respectons le plan. Noël, comme prévu. No, let's stick to the plan. Christmas, as planned. Eleanor pretended to be occupied with clearing dessert plates, but her mind was racing. They were discussing the timeline Christmas Eve. Just as Mark had predicted, the engagement was the trigger point for the next phase of their scheme. When the evening wound down and they prepared to leave, Patricia took Eleanor's hands warmly. We are so grateful that our Sophie found Michael, and through him, family is everything. Don't you agree? Oh, absolutely, Eleanor said, smiling serenely. Family is the most important thing in the world. We'd do anything to protect the people we love. As their car disappeared down the driveway, Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it. exhaling slowly. She'd survived the first test. Now she had 4 days to prepare for Christmas Eve. The next morning, Eleanor met with Mark and Agent Diana Rodriguez at a small cafe 15 miles from Austin, far enough away to avoid accidental encounters with Michael or the Millers. Diana Rodriguez was younger than Eleanor had expected, perhaps in her mid-30s, with intelligent eyes and the focused demeanor of someone who had seen every variation of human deception. "Mrs. Wilson, I can't imagine how difficult this is for you," Diana said after introductions. "Most families in your position either enable the fraud unwittingly or look the other way to maintain family peace." "That's not an option," Eleanor said firmly. "I respect that." Diana nodded. "Mark has briefed me on what you've learned so far. I'd like to hear your impressions from last night's dinner." Eleanor recounted the inconsistencies she'd noticed the Parisian accents despite their supposed Marseille residence, the lack of authentic knowledge about regional cuisine, the vague responses to specific questions about teaching career and local knowledge. The most concerning thing was their discussion of the timeline when Michael was out of the room, she concluded. "They're definitely planning something for Christmas Eve." Just as we suspected, Diana took notes throughout Eleanor's account. "This is consistent with what we've seen in other cases involving this network. They operate with surprising discipline-structured timelines, coordinated roles, careful management of information. Most victims never realize what's happening until it's too late." "What happens now?" Eleanor asked. "We continue building our case," Diana explained. "I'll be monitoring their activities discreetly for the next few weeks. We need to document pattern of behavior, evidence of coordination, and most importantly, establish their true identities conclusively. And Christmas Eve, we'll be ready to intervene," Diana assured her. "The plan is to arrive during your family dinner, ostensibly for a routine immigration follow-up with Sophie. The timing will allow us to confront her before the proposal, while ensuring all parties are present to witness her reaction." Eleanor nodded slowly. "And Michael? What happens to him in all this?" Mark and Diana exchanged glances. "I won't sugarcoat it," Diana said gently. "This will be devastating for him. He'll feel betrayed, humiliated, and angry possibly at everyone involved, including you for not telling him sooner. But," Mark added, "he'll also be protected from a marriage that would have destroyed him financially and emotionally. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is prevent greater harm, even if it causes pain in the moment." Eleanor knew they were right, but the thought of her son's heartbreak still felt like a physical weight on her chest. "Is there any way to prepare him to soften the blow somehow?" Diana shook her head. "Any warning could jeopardize the operation. Amanda Harris Sophie is a professional. At the first sign of suspicion, she'll disappear, along with her associates. Then she'll simply find another target, another family to destroy. The harsh reality settled over them like a shadow, to save Michael. Eleanor would have to watch him walk blindly toward heartbreak, knowing she could have warned him but chose not to. "There's one more thing you should know," Diana said, sliding a folder across the table. "We've confirmed that the real Sophie Miller exists and has indeed been a victim of identity theft. The woman calling herself Sophie has constructed her persona using details from the real Sophie's life, mixed with fabrications that serve her purposes." Eleanor opened the folder to find a photograph of a young woman who resembled Sophie only in the most general way, similar hair color and build, but with a completely different face. The real Sophie Miller looked younger, her expression more open and genuine. "Has she been notified? We're working through proper channels with French authorities," Diana explained. "Identity theft across international boundaries is complicated, legally speaking, but yes, she'll be informed and protected." As they parted ways, Diana gave Eleanor final instructions: continue normal interactions, gather information discreetly, and prepare for Christmas Eve. "We'll be in constant communication," she assured Eleanor. "You're not facing this alone." The next 4 days passed in a strange blur of normalcy and deception. Eleanor hosted another dinner, attended a small gallery featuring Sophie's artwork, mediocre landscapes with inflated prices, and even joined them for a day trip to San Antonio. Throughout it all, she maintained her role as the delighted future mother-in-law, all while documenting every inconsistency and suspicious interaction for Mark and Diana. The Millers departed on Sunday with emotional farewells and promises to return for the wedding. Eleanor hugged Patricia goodbye, accepting the woman's kisses on both cheeks while wondering what her real name was and how many other families she had helped destroy. As their car disappeared down the street, Michael turned to Eleanor with shining eyes. "They're wonderful, aren't they? I can see where Sophie gets her charm." "They certainly made an impression," Eleanor replied carefully. "Mom, thank you for everything this week. I know how important family is to Sophie, and you made them feel so welcome." He hugged her tightly. "I can't wait for Christmas Eve. It's going to be perfect." Eleanor held her son close, fighting back tears. "I love you, Michael, more than anything in this world." "I know, Mom." He pulled back, smiling. "And I'm the luckiest guy alive to have you and Sophie both in my life." As she watched him drive away, Eleanor felt a cold determination replace her sadness. Amanda Harris and her accomplices had no idea what was coming. Christmas Eve couldn't arrive soon enough. Christmas Eve arrived with an unseasonable warmth that seemed at odds with the traditional holiday decorations throughout Eleanor's neighborhood. She'd spent the morning cooking, cleaning, and mentally rehearsing every possible scenario for the evening ahead. Diana Rodriguez had confirmed their plan via text. She would arrive at 7:30 halfway through dinner, with official credentials and documentation ready. At 6 o'clock, Eleanor stood in her kitchen, putting final touches on the traditional Christmas dinner she'd prepared. The table was set with her best china. Crystal glasses sparkled in the candlelight, and a small velvet box containing her mother's ring sat wrapped under the tree, ready for a proposal that would never happen. The doorbell rang at precisely 6:15. Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothed her festive red dress, and opened the door to find Michael and Sophie standing on her doorstep, both dressed elegantly for the occasion. "Merry Christmas, Mom," Michael beamed, stepping forward to embrace her. He smelled of expensive cologne, his excitement palpable. "Mrs. Wilson, everything looks beautiful," Sophie said, handing over a carefully wrapped bottle of French wine. "Thank you for hosting us tonight." Eleanor accepted the gift with a smile. "Please, come in. Dinner's almost ready." As they settled in the living room with pre-dinner drinks, Eleanor couldn't help noticing the subtle changes in Sophie's behavior over the past month. The woman was more confident now, her performance more polished. She'd clearly decided that her position in Michael's life was secure enough that she no longer needed to try quite so hard to impress Eleanor. "Michael tells me you've been busy with Christmas preparations," Sophie commented, glancing around the tastefully decorated living room. "Everything is so traditional." There was a hint of condescension in her tone that wouldn't have been noticeable to someone who wasn't listening for it. "Well, traditions are important in our family," Eleanor replied. "Michael's father always insisted on a proper Christmas celebration. It's one of the ways we keep his memory alive." Michael raised his glass in a silent toast to his father's memory. "Speaking of traditions," Sophie said, "I've been telling Michael about how we celebrate Christmas in France. So different from the American version." She launched into a description of midnight mass, réveillon feasts, and the traditions of southern France that sounded remarkably like something copied from a travel blog rather than lived experience. Eleanor nodded along, asking occasional questions that probed for specific regional details. Each time, Sophie would provide vague answers or quickly redirect the conversation, a pattern Eleanor had come to recognize as her strategy when confronted with topics beyond her scripted knowledge. At 7:20, as they were finishing the main course, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "En route? 10 minutes? Everything all right?" Michael asked, noticing her quick glance at the phone. "Just a neighbor checking if we need anything," Eleanor lied smoothly. "Now, who's ready for dessert? I've made bûche de Noël." Sophie's eyebrows rose slightly. "You made a traditional Yule log. How ambitious." The doorbell rang just as Eleanor was serving the dessert. She checked her watch, 7:30 exactly. Diana Rodriguez was punctual. "Are you expecting someone?" Michael asked, confused. "Just a last-minute delivery," Eleanor improvised, rising from the table. "I'll only be a moment." Diana stood on the porch in business attire that could pass for dinner party appropriate. She gave Eleanor a reassuring nod before they both returned to the dining room. I'm sorry to interrupt your Christmas Eve, Diana announced as they entered, her tone professionally polite. My name is Diana Rodriguez. I'm with Immigration and Customs Enforcement, following up on some paperwork regarding Ms. Miller's visa status. The transformation in Sophie was subtle but immediate. Her posture stiffened. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and her hand tightened around her wine glass. This seems like a strange time for immigration matters, she said coolly. It's Christmas Eve. I apologize for the timing, Diana replied, pulling out a chair. May I join you? This won't take long. Michael looked bewildered. Of course. Please sit down. Is there some problem with Sophie's visa? Not a problem exactly, Diana said, opening her briefcase. Just some inconsistencies we'd like to clarify. Sophie's expression remained composed, but Eleanor noticed a slight tremor in her hand as she set down her wine glass. I'm sure my documentation is in order, Sophie said. I've been very careful with all the requirements. I'm sure you have, Diana nodded, then pulled out a folder. Ms. Miller, or should I say, Ms. Harris, Amanda Harris. The room went utterly still. Michael's face registered confusion, then disbelief. What, there must be some mistake. There's no mistake, Mr. Wilson, Diana said firmly, placing photographs on the table. The woman you know as Sophie Miller is actually Amanda Harris, an American citizen born in Cleveland, Ohio. She's wanted for immigration fraud, identity theft, and multiple counts of marriage fraud across 7 states. Sophie Amanda didn't move, her face a mask of calculation as she assessed her options. This is ridiculous, she said finally, her voice hard but still maintaining the French accent. I don't know what you're talking about. Diana laid out more evidence: passport records, marriage certificates, divorce decrees, all featuring the same woman under different names. We've been tracking your organization for some time, Ms. Harris. The pattern is distinctive, targeting financially stable single men, fabricating European backgrounds, accelerating relationships toward marriage, then disappearing with assets after securing citizenship benefits. Michael looked shell-shocked, his gaze moving between the evidence on the table and the woman he thought he loved. Sophie, tell them they're wrong. Tell them this is some kind of mistake. For a moment, Eleanor thought Amanda might try to maintain the charade, to leverage Michael's obvious devotion against the mounting evidence. But then she looked at the documents spread across Diana's folder, calculated the odds, and made a different choice. She laughed. It was a cold, amused sound that had nothing of Sophie's musical French accent. When she spoke, her voice was flat, American, and utterly without remorse. Oh, Michael, you poor, sweet, stupid man. Michael recoiled as if he'd been slapped. What? Amanda picked up her wine glass and took a deliberate sip, dropping the French accent entirely. Her posture, her mannerisms, even her facial expressions changed the elegant, cultured European woman, vanishing to reveal someone harder, colder, and distinctly American. Did you really think someone like me would fall for someone like you without an ulterior motive? She asked, gesturing dismissively. You're boring, Michael, predictable. The kind of man who thinks buying flowers and opening doors makes him irresistible to sophisticated European women. The cruelty was breathtaking. She wasn't just confessing, she was deliberately destroying him. The accent, the stories about France, the whole romantic narrative, it was all research and performance, she continued, seemingly enjoying his pain. I spent 3 weeks studying your social media, your interests, your psychological profile before I ever approached you at that coffee shop. Michael sat down heavily, as if his legs could no longer support him. The book. You said it was recommended by a friend. Amazon reviews and customer purchase patterns, Amanda shrugged. I bought 5 books I knew would appeal to lonely divorced men in their 30s looking for intellectual connection. Yours was the easiest mark in the coffee shop that day. Diana moved toward Amanda, handcuffs ready. Amanda Harris, you're under arrest for immigration fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit marriage fraud. But Amanda wasn't finished with her performance. She looked directly at Eleanor, her eyes filled with genuine hatred. You think you've won something. Old woman, you've destroyed your relationship with your son to stop something that was always going to end anyway. I would have divorced him in 2 years. Taken my cut. and disappeared. She turned back to Michael, who was staring at her like she was a stranger, which, of course, she was. Your mother didn't save you, Michael. She just ensured that you'll never trust love again. Eleanor felt her heart breaking for her son as Diana read Amanda her rights and secured the handcuffs around her wrists. Michael sat motionless at the dining room table, surrounded by the festive Christmas decorations that now seemed like cruel mockery of his shattered dreams. As Diana led Amanda toward the door, the woman called out one final revelation that changed everything Eleanor thought she understood about the situation. Wait, don't you want to know about the real Sophie Miller? Diana paused. What about her? Amanda's smile was vicious. She's real, 28 years old, lives in Marseille with her parents, works in hotel management just like I claimed. I studied her social media for months, stole her identity piece by piece, built my cover story around her actual life. Eleanor's blood went cold. What are you saying? I'm saying there's a real woman in France who has no idea her identity was stolen, who might be getting visits from American immigration officials, asking questions about her fictional boyfriend and his family. Amanda's eyes glittered with malice. I'm saying your investigation might have just destroyed an innocent person's life along with your son's. The front door closed behind them, leaving Eleanor and Michael alone in the wreckage of Christmas Eve dinner. He sat motionless at the dining room table, staring at the scattered evidence of his shattered fairy tale. Is it true? He asked quietly. What she said about the real Sophie. Eleanor sank into the chair across from him, suddenly feeling every one of her 64 years. I don't know. Mark, the investigator I hired, he'll have to look into it. Mark, Michael's voice was flat. How long have you known? 3 weeks, since the night she called me an ugly cow in French, thinking I couldn't understand her. For the first time since Diana had revealed the truth, Michael looked directly at his mother. She called you what? She was on the phone with someone, speaking French, explaining how she was going to manipulate you into marriage and then divorce you for money and citizenship. I heard everything. Michael was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was a bitter sound, but not entirely humorless. An ugly cow. That's actually pretty accurate, considering how she played me. Michael, no. She's right about one thing. I don't know if I'll ever trust anyone again. He stood up, moving to the window where he could see Diana's car driving away. 3 weeks. Mom, you knew for 3 weeks that the woman I loved was planning to destroy my life. And you didn't tell me. You wouldn't have believed me. Maybe not. But you could have tried. He turned back to her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Disappointment so deep, it looked like grief. Instead, you orchestrated this whole evening. Let me make a fool of myself. Let me get excited about proposing. Let me bring her into our family home for one final performance before you brought it all crashing down. He was right, and they both knew it. She could have handled this differently, found a way to warn him, to protect him from the public humiliation of having his girlfriend arrested in front of him. I was trying to protect you, she said weakly. By lying to me, by investigating behind my back, by treating me like I was too stupid to handle the truth. Michael picked up the small gift-wrapped box from the side table, the ring he'd planned to offer Amanda tonight. This was Grandma's ring. Yes, she would have worn it, taken it with her when she divorced me. Grandma's ring would have ended up in some pawn shop or sold online to fund her next con. The thought hadn't occurred to Eleanor, but it hit like a physical blow. 4 generations of family history reduced to criminal profit. Michael pocketed the ring box and headed for the door. I need some time to process this. Michael, wait. I love you, Mom, but I can't be around you right now. Every time I look at you, I'm going to think about how you didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth. The door closed quietly behind him, leaving Eleanor alone with the remains of Christmas Eve dinner and the weight of choices that had been both completely right and utterly devastating. But Amanda had made one final mistake in her parting shot. She'd revealed the existence of the real Sophie Miller, which meant there was still one more chapter to this story, one more chance to find something redemptive in the wreckage. That night, Eleanor called Mark Webb with new instructions. Find the real Sophie and find out how to make this right. New Year's Day dawned cold and gray, matching Eleanor's mood perfectly. It had been a week since Christmas Eve, a week since Michael had walked out of her house and her life. He wasn't answering her calls or texts, and she'd resisted the urge to drive by his apartment to check on him. He was an adult. He needed space, and she needed to respect that, no matter how much it hurt. She was pouring her second cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. Her heart leapt with hope. Michael, but it was Mark Reynolds standing on her doorstep, looking grim but determined. "I have information about Sophie Miller," he said without preamble. "The real one." Eleanor ushered him inside, away from the biting January wind. "What did you find?" Mark set his briefcase on the kitchen table and extracted a thick folder. "Sophie Miller, 28, born and raised in Marseille. Parents are legitimate. Father was indeed a literature professor, now retired. Mother works in local government administration. Sophie herself has worked in hotel management for the past 6 years. Currently assistant manager at a boutique hotel in the Old Port District." Eleanor studied the photograph of the real Sophie. There was a superficial resemblance to Amanda's similar build and coloring, but the real Sophie's face was softer, more open, with none of Amanda's calculated perfection. How did Amanda find her? Social media, most likely. Sophie has active accounts on several platforms. Nothing extraordinary. Just normal life updates, travel photos, work achievements. Amanda probably searched for French women in Sophie's age range with the right professional background and physical appearance, then built her persona around the details she could glean online. "Has Sophie been notified about the identity theft?" Mark's expression darkened. "That's where things get complicated. French authorities did contact her, but the situation has already caused significant problems. Her bank accounts were temporarily frozen pending investigation. Her employer received inquiries about her supposed relationship with an American man. There are rumors circulating in her community." Eleanor felt sick. Amanda's parting shot hadn't been empty spite. She'd genuinely damaged an innocent woman's life. "Can we help her somehow make this right?" "That's why I'm here," Mark nodded. "I've been in contact with Sophie directly. Explained the situation as delicately as possible. She's understandably upset and confused, but also relieved to finally understand what's been happening. How is she doing? Financially stressed. Turns out her mother has been battling cancer for the past year. The treatment costs are significant, and having her accounts frozen, even temporarily, created serious hardship." Eleanor made a quick decision. "I want to help her, financially and legally, whatever it takes to repair the damage Amanda caused." "I thought you might say that," Mark replied. "I've drafted a proposal. Complete financial assistance for any legal costs related to clearing her name, plus compensation for damages. I've also arranged for a leading identity protection service to monitor her accounts going forward." Eleanor reviewed the documents Mark presented, making notes and suggestions. By the time they finished, they had a comprehensive plan to help Sophie recover from Amanda's exploitation. "There's one more thing," Mark said hesitantly. "Sophie mentioned she's been considering a change of scene, possibly looking for hotel management opportunities abroad. I suggested that Austin has a thriving hospitality industry." Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "You think she should come here after everything that's happened?" "I think she deserves the opportunity to reclaim her narrative," Mark said simply. "And I think you and Michael might benefit from meeting the real Sophie Miller." The idea was audacious, potentially disastrous, but also strangely compelling. The real Sophie had been victimized just as surely as Michael had. Perhaps there was healing possible in that shared experience. Would she even consider it, coming to the place where her identity was misused so thoroughly? "She's cautiously open to the idea. I suggested a short visit initially, 2 weeks. Perhaps no pressure, no expectations. Just a chance to meet the people who helped expose the fraud and possibly explore professional opportunities." Eleanor sat back, considering the possibilities. Michael might refuse to see her. Of course, he might see the whole thing as another manipulation, but he might also find some closure in meeting the real person behind Amanda's fabricated persona. "Make the arrangements," she decided. "Offer her a place to stay here if she's comfortable with that. And Mark, thank you for everything. I don't know how we would have navigated this without you." After Mark left, Eleanor found herself standing before the family photos on her mantelpiece. Michael's graduation portrait. Robert's last Christmas before his heart attack. Her own parents on their 50th anniversary. Generations of genuine love and connection that Amanda Harris had attempted to exploit. But perhaps something good could still emerge from this disaster. Perhaps the real Sophie Miller's arrival would be the beginning of healing, not just another chapter of pain. Eleanor picked up her phone and typed a message to Michael. I know you need space, and I respect that. But when you're ready, there's something important we need to discuss. Something that might help make sense of all this. I love you. She hit send, not expecting an immediate response, but hoping the door to reconciliation remained at least slightly ajar. The January rain tapped against the windows as Eleanor stood in the arrival terminal at Austin Bergstrom International Airport, holding a neatly lettered sign, Sophie Miller. 2 months had passed since the disastrous Christmas Eve dinner. 2 months of cautious communication with Michael, who had gradually moved from anger to a tentative willingness to talk again, though their relationship remained strained. Eleanor checked her watch. Sophie's flight from Paris had landed 20 minutes ago. Mark had arranged everything: the flights, temporary work visa, and introductions to several hotel managers in Austin who were interested in Sophie's European hospitality experience. Eleanor had even prepared the guest room with fresh linens and small touches that might make a French visitor feel welcome. A slender young woman with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple ponytail approached hesitantly, wheeling a modest suitcase. She wore a practical travel outfit: jeans, a light sweater, and comfortable shoes nothing like Amanda's calculated elegance. Mrs. Wilson? She asked in accented English. I am Sophie, the real one, I think. Eleanor couldn't help smiling. Yes, you're definitely the real one. Thank you for coming all this way. As they walked to the parking garage, Eleanor was struck by how different Sophie was from her impersonator. Where Amanda had been performative and polished, the real Sophie moved with a natural grace that required no audience. Her French accent was stronger, her English occasionally hesitant, but there was an authenticity to her that Amanda could never have counterfeited. I still don't understand why someone would steal my life, Sophie said as they drove toward Austin. I am not so interesting. That's exactly why, Eleanor explained. Amanda, the woman who impersonated you, needed an identity that was real enough to be verifiable, but ordinary enough not to raise suspicions. Your life in Marseille, your work in hotels, your family background, it all created a perfect foundation for her to build her deception. Sophie nodded slowly. Mr. Reynolds explained that she is part of a network of professional criminals. Yes? She's facing multiple charges now. Immigration fraud, identity theft, wire fraud. The prosecutor believes she'll serve significant time. Good, Sophie said firmly. What she did to your son? To you? To me. She shook her head. It is cruel. As they arrived at Eleanor's house, Sophie looked around with genuine appreciation. This is beautiful, very different from Marseille's. I hope you'll be comfortable here, Eleanor said, showing her to the guest room. I've tried to make it feel welcoming, but please tell me if you need anything at all. Sophie set her suitcase down and turned to Eleanor with a direct gaze. Mrs. Wilson, before we go further, I must ask, why did you bring me here? Is it only to help me, or is there something more? Eleanor appreciated the young woman's forthright approach. Both, she admitted. I wanted to help you recover from what Amanda did, but I also hoped... Well, I hoped that meeting the real Sophie Miller might help my son understand that not everything was a lie, that somewhere beneath all the deception was a real person whose life and identity were stolen. Sophie considered this for a moment. And does your son know I am here? Not yet. I wanted to meet you first, to make sure you were comfortable with the idea of meeting him. Michael's been through a terrible trauma. I won't ask you to be part of his healing process unless you're fully willing. I understand, Sophie said softly. I would like to meet him. I think we are both victims of the same person. No. Perhaps we can help each other make sense of what happened. The next morning, Eleanor called Michael, her heart racing with nervousness. I have something important to tell you, she began when he answered. The real Sophie Miller is here in Austin. She's staying at my house. Silence stretched across the line. Michael, I heard you, he said finally. I'm just processing. The real Sophie, the woman Amanda stole from. Yes, Mark helped arrange everything. She's here for 2 weeks, exploring job opportunities and helping us understand exactly what happened. More silence. Then, why didn't you tell me you were planning this? Eleanor took a deep breath. Because I wasn't sure you'd want to know. Because I've been trying to respect your space and your process. And because I wanted to meet her first. To make sure she wasn't... She trailed off. To make sure she wasn't another con artist, Michael finished for her, his voice tinged with bitterness. I guess I can't blame you for that. Would you like to meet her? Eleanor asked carefully. No pressure. She understands if you're not ready. The pause was shorter this time. Yes, I think I would. Not here, though somewhere public. They arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown Neutral Territory, where both Michael and Sophie would feel comfortable. Eleanor deliberately chose a different cafe from the one where Michael had first encountered Amanda. When they arrived the next day, Michael was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. Eleanor saw him tense as they approached, his eyes widening slightly as he took in the real Sophie Miller. Michael, Eleanor said quietly. This is Sophie. Sophie extended her hand. Hello, Michael. It is strange to meet you, knowing how my name has been used. He shook her hand, studying her face. You're nothing like her. Sophie smiled slightly. I should hope not. Eleanor excused herself after a few minutes of awkward small talk, giving them privacy to talk without her presence complicating things. She found a bookshop across the street where she could wait, glancing occasionally through the window to see them deep in conversation. 2 hours later, Michael texted her, finished talking, walking Sophie back to your place. Meet you there. When Eleanor arrived home, she found them in the kitchen, Sophie teaching Michael how to make authentic French press coffee. You must wait 4 minutes exactly, Sophie was saying, timer in hand. Not 3, not 5. Mom, Michael acknowledged her with a small nod. Not quite a smile, but not the coldness of recent weeks either. Sophie's been teaching me about real French coffee. Turns out everything I thought I knew was wrong. The metaphor wasn't lost on Eleanor. How was your talk clarifying? Michael said after a moment. Sophie showed me her actual social media accounts, the real versions of the stories Amanda twisted. It's strange to see the source material for all the lies. Sophie pressed down the plunger on the French press. We discovered that Amanda used my actual birthday party photos, but invented all the stories about them. She took pictures of my parents' home, but created fictional careers for them. It was like seeing my life through a funhouse mirror. It helped, Michael admitted. Seeing the real person behind the fiction. Separating what was stolen from what was invented. After coffee, Sophie excused herself to make some phone calls, leaving mother and son alone for the first time in weeks. I'm still angry, Michael said quietly when Sophie had left. Not just at Amanda, but at you too. You should have told me sooner. I know, Eleanor acknowledged. I was trying to protect you, but I should have trusted you with the truth. I'm sorry. Michael, he was quiet for a long moment. I understand why you did it. I probably wouldn't have believed you without proof. But being ambushed like that, on Christmas Eve of all nights. It was cruel, Eleanor admitted. Diana insisted on the timing, but I should have pushed back. Found another way. Michael ran a hand through his hair. Sophie said something interesting. She said that what Amanda stole from both of us was agency, the right to make our own informed decisions. From her by taking her identity. From me by manipulating my feelings. From you by forcing you into an impossible position. Eleanor felt a flash of gratitude toward Sophie for that insight. She's very perceptive. She's real, Michael said simply. Everything about her is authentic in a way Amanda never was. The hesitations in her English, the way she talks about her family's struggles with her mother's illness, even the way she gets passionate about proper coffee techniques, it's all genuine. Are you going to see her again before she returns to France? Michael nodded. I'm taking her on a tour of Austin tomorrow. She's never been to Texas before, and she wants to see the real America, not the tourist version. As he prepared to leave, Michael paused at the door. I'm not ready to fully forgive you yet, Mom, but I'm working on it. And thank you for finding Sophie, the real one. It's helping me understand what happened. It was progress painful, halting progress, but movement toward healing nonetheless. Over the next week, Eleanor watched with quiet amazement as Sophie's presence worked subtle changes on both herself and Michael. The young Frenchwoman had an unassuming wisdom that seemed to create space for honest conversation without judgment. Sophie spent her days exploring job opportunities at several upscale hotels in Austin, while her evenings were often spent with either Eleanor or Michael, sometimes both. Eleanor found herself sharing stories about her diplomatic career in Paris, reminiscing about places Sophie knew well from a different era. The Café de Flore is still there, Sophie told her over dinner one evening, still filled with people pretending to read philosophy while watching others. Eleanor laughed. Some things never change. I spent countless hours there in my 20s, nursing a single coffee for hours while eavesdropping on actual intellectuals. Paris creates such memories, Sophie nodded. But Marseille has its own magic. The sea, the sun, the mix of cultures. It shaped me differently than Paris would have. Tell me about your family, Eleanor prompted gently. The real version, not Amanda's fiction. Sophie's expression softened. My father taught literature. That part was true. But at a local lycée, not the Sorbonne. He loves poetry and often recites Baudelaire from memory when he's had too much wine. She laughed, a genuine sound that held nothing of Amanda's calculated charm. My mother works for the city managing cultural programs. She's very passionate about preserving Provençal traditions. She's been sick for 2 years now, breast cancer. The treatments are expensive, even with our healthcare system. I'm sorry, Eleanor said sincerely. That must be incredibly difficult. It has been challenging, Sophie acknowledged. That's partly why I'm considering moving abroad. The salary potential is much higher here, and I could send money home to help with her care. By the end of Sophie's first week in Austin, she had received 2 job offers, one from a boutique hotel downtown and another from a larger international chain. Both offered substantial increases from her current salary in Marseille, along with visa sponsorship. I'm seriously considering the boutique hotel, she told Eleanor and Michael over dinner. The atmosphere reminds me of where I work now, but with better opportunities for advancement. You'd really move here? Michael asked. After everything that happened, Sophie considered the question. Perhaps because of everything that happened, Amanda stole my identity to create a fictional life here. Maybe there's something, I don't know the English word, poetic about me claiming a real life in the same place. Michael nodded slowly. A reclamation. Yes, exactly, Sophie smiled. Plus, I like Austin. It's vibrant, diverse. Not what I expected of Texas. What did you expect? Eleanor asked, curious. Cowboys, oil wells, everyone in cowboy hats saying howdy, partner, Sophie admitted with a laugh. American movies have much to answer for. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated with genuine laughter, something that had been absent from Eleanor's home for too long. As Michael prepared to leave that evening, he surprised Eleanor by giving her a quick hug. I think I'm ready to talk, he said quietly. Really talk. About everything that happened. Can you come by my place tomorrow? Eleanor felt a surge of hope. Of course. What time? Around 7, I'll order dinner. The next evening, Eleanor arrived at Michael's apartment with a nervous flutter in her stomach. This was the first time he'd invited her over since Christmas Eve. Michael opened the door, looking tired but resolute. Thanks for coming, Mom. They settled in his living room with takeout from their favorite Thai restaurant, a tradition from the years after Robert's death when neither of them had felt much like cooking. I've been seeing a therapist, Michael said after they'd eaten in companionable silence for a few minutes. Trying to understand how I fell for Amanda's manipulation so completely. What have you learned? Eleanor asked gently. That I was the perfect target, recently divorced, wanting to believe in love again, attracted to what seemed exotic and different from my failed marriage. He set down his fork. The therapist says con artists like Amanda study their marks, learn exactly which buttons to push. It doesn't mean I'm stupid, just human. You're one of the smartest people I know, Eleanor assured him. Intelligence doesn't make us immune to emotional manipulation. I know that now, Michael took a deep breath. I've also been thinking about why I was so angry with you. It wasn't just that you kept the investigation secret. It was that you saw through her when I couldn't. It felt like failure. Like I should have known better. Oh, Michael, Eleanor sighed. I only saw through her by accident. If I hadn't understood French, if I hadn't overheard that phone call, I would have been just as convinced as you were. She was that good. Maybe, he conceded. But you were right to be suspicious, to investigate. I just wish that I'd told you sooner, Eleanor finished. I wish that too. I was trying to protect you, but I ended up hurting you more. We both made mistakes, Michael said after a moment. I should have listened to your concerns about how quickly the relationship was moving. You should have trusted me with your suspicions. But in the end, we're still family. That's what matters. Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes. That means everything to me. I'm not saying I'm completely over it, Michael cautioned. I still have moments of anger, of humiliation when I remember how thoroughly I was deceived. But I'm working through it, and having Sophie here, the real Sophie, has helped more than I expected. She's remarkable, Eleanor agreed. So different from what Amanda pretended to be. That's the irony, Michael said with a rueful smile. I like the real Sophie much more than I ever liked the fake one. There's a genuineness to her that Amanda could never quite capture, no matter how well she performed. Have you two been spending much time together? Eleanor asked carefully. Some, Michael admitted. Nothing romantic, we're both too raw for that. But there's a strange connection in having been victims of the same person. We understand each other's experience in a way no one else can. They talked late into the night, carefully navigating the painful terrain of recent months, finding their way back to the trust that had always defined their relationship. When Eleanor finally left, Michael hugged her tightly. I love you, Mom. Even when I'm angry, I never stopped loving you. I love you too, she whispered. More than anything in this world. Sophie's 2-week visit stretched into 3 as she finalized details with the boutique hotel that had offered her a position. The Hotel Mirabeau, a recently renovated historic property downtown, had been impressed with her experience and her fluent command of multiple languages, a valuable asset for Austin's growing international tourism. They want me to start in April, she told Eleanor over breakfast. That gives me time to return to Marseille, help my mother through her next round of treatments, and arrange for my move. Eleanor nodded, surprised by the twinge of sadness she felt at the thought of Sophie leaving, even temporarily. In just 3 weeks, the young woman had become a bright presence in her home, bringing a genuine warmth that contrasted sharply with Amanda's calculated charm. Will your parents be all right with you moving so far away? Sophie smiled slightly. My father said, the ocean between us changes nothing. You remain our daughter wherever you stand. My mother is more practical. She's already researching video calling options and planning her visit once she's stronger. They sound wonderful, Eleanor said sincerely. They are. Nothing like the fiction Amanda created. Sophie hesitated. Michael has offered to help me find an apartment when I return. Would that be uncomfortable for you? Eleanor considered the question carefully. She'd noticed Michael and Sophie spending more time together over the past week exploring Austin, having long conversations over coffee, gradually building a friendship based on shared experience and genuine connection. Not at all, she assured Sophie. I think it's good for both of you. You understand each other's experiences in a way few others could. Later that afternoon, Michael stopped by to see Sophie before she left for France. Eleanor gave them privacy, busying herself in the garden until Michael sought her out. I'm driving Sophie to the airport tomorrow, he said, sitting beside Eleanor on the garden bench. Her flight's at noon. Will you miss her? Eleanor asked. Michael considered this. Yes, I think I will. Not in the desperate way I would have missed Amanda, that wasn't real. But Sophie, she's become a friend. A genuine friend. She's coming back, Eleanor reminded him. I know. Michael was quiet for a moment. It's strange. When I first agreed to meet her, I thought it would be painful, a reminder of everything that happened. Instead, Getting to know her has helped me separate the real from the false. To understand that what Amanda stole wasn't just Sophie's identity, but my ability to trust my own judgment. And now I'm starting to trust again. Carefully, slowly. But it's happening. He reached over and squeezed his mother's hand. With Sophie. With you. Even with myself. The next morning, Eleanor hugged Sophie goodbye on the front porch, promising to stay in touch while she was in France. "Thank you for everything," Sophie said warmly. "Not just the hospitality, but for finding me, for helping clear my name, for giving me this opportunity." "We should be thanking you," Eleanor replied. "Your presence here has been healing for both Michael and me." As Sophie's taxi pulled away, Eleanor felt a sense of closure beginning to form around the painful events of the past few months. There was still healing to be done, trust to be rebuilt. But for the first time since Christmas Eve, she could see a path forward for her family. That evening, she received a text from Michael. "Sophie got on her flight okay. Having dinner at home tonight if you'd like to join me." Eleanor smiled at the simple invitation that represented so much more than a meal. 2 months passed quickly. Sophie returned to Austin in early April, and true to his word, Michael helped her find a small apartment not far from the Hotel Mirabeau. Eleanor hosted a small welcome dinner, delighted to see Sophie looking happier and more settled. "My mother's treatments are working," Sophie shared over dinner. "The doctors are optimistic, and knowing I can send money home each month has relieved so much stress for all of us." "That's wonderful news," Eleanor said sincerely. As spring turned to summer, Eleanor watched with quiet joy as a natural rhythm developed between the three of them. Sunday dinners at her house became a tradition. Michael and Sophie's friendship deepened gradually, neither of them rushing into anything that might echo the artificial whirlwind of Michael's relationship with Amanda. "We're taking it very slowly," Michael confided to Eleanor one evening while Sophie was in the kitchen. "We both have trust issues to work through, but there's something real there, something worth exploring carefully." In August, nearly 8 months after the disastrous Christmas Eve dinner, Eleanor received news that Amanda Harris had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and immigration violations. The criminal network she'd been part of was being systematically dismantled by authorities. Eleanor shared the news with Michael and Sophie over Sunday dinner. "It's finally over," she said. "She can't hurt anyone else for a long time." "Good," Sophie said firmly. "Justice matters." Michael was quieter, processing the news. "You know what's strange? I barely remember what she looked like now. The real Sophie has replaced the fake one in my memory." Sophie blushed slightly at this, but her smile was genuine. Later that evening, as they sat in Eleanor's garden enjoying the warm summer night, Michael cleared his throat nervously. "I have something to ask both of you," he began. "Sophie and I have been talking and, well, we'd like to try dating, officially, but given everything that's happened, we wanted to make sure you were comfortable with it. Mom." Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "The fact that you're asking means everything. Of course I'm comfortable with it. I just want you both to be happy." Sophie reached across the table to squeeze Eleanor's hand. "We would not be here without you. You saved your son from a terrible situation, and you found me when you didn't have to. You've given us both a second chance." "To second chances," Michael said, raising his glass. "To second chances," Eleanor echoed, feeling a deep sense of peace settle over her. Out of the ashes of deception, something genuine had emerged not just between Michael and Sophie, but within their unlikely family triangle. Amanda Harris had meant to destroy them all, but instead, she had inadvertently brought them together in a connection based on truth, understanding, and real affection. As they sat together in the warm Texas evening, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought them here. From that first dinner where she'd overheard Amanda's cruel dismissal in French, through the painful revelations and broken trust, to this moment of quiet contentment. It hadn't been an easy path, but perhaps the most meaningful connections rarely were. The real Sophie Miller was nothing like her imposter, and that had turned out to be exactly what they all needed to learn to trust again.